down? Keep more of your hard-earned money with the Tangerine no-fee daily checking account. You won't pay fees to do your everyday banking, and you'll get free Tangerine email money transfers, free unlimited debit purchases, and free deposits. It's your money after all, and you shouldn't have to pay unfair fees to use it. Become a client at tangerine.ca. Tangerine. Forward banking.
Hello, I'm Carol Off.
Good evening, I'm Jeff Douglas, and this is As It Happens, the podcast edition. Tonight,
it's in desperate need of repair, but he wasn't there to mend fences. On his visit to Puerto Rico, U.S. President Donald Trump downplays the effects of Hurricane Maria,
Hello?
complains about the cost of the relief effort, and expresses strong approval of
As It
himself.
Happens, departure before arrival. After nearly a year and a half of paperwork and anxiety, a gay Syrian refugee's application is finally approved. But after his sudden death, a friend is wondering why the Canadian government didn't bring him sooner.
Helping the inconsolable. After the on his visit, in the aftermath of the shooting in Las Vegas, help for survivors in mourning and shock is desperate. The cost of the relief effort and many counselors and therapists to respond.
The cold at the end of the rainbow. At a concert in Cairo, fans unfurl the pride flag and are promptly rounded up and charged, horrifying the lead singer of the band. And is wondering why the Canadian government didn't bring him sooner.
Anyone with a radio has spent hours with Tom Petty, but our guest's time with the late rock star yielded a book, a friendship, and a deeper understanding of the hard work that went into his dozens of hits.
And Skulls out for summer. But the head of the late philosopher Jeremy Bentham, who died in 1832, is set to go on display this fall at University College London, just as he requested before his death. As It Happens, the Tuesday edition, radio that guesses he was ahead of his time and ahead of ours too. Two weeks after Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico, the President of the United States has done the same. Donald Trump was touring the hurricane-ravaged island today, and he continues to come under fire for his comments about the disaster and the U.S. territory's response. But at a press conference today, he again praised his own government for its work and compared Hurricane Maria to a, quote, real catastrophe, Hurricane Katrina.
Now, I hate to tell you, Puerto Rico, but you've thrown our budget a little out of whack, because we've spent a lot of money on Puerto Rico, and that's fine. We've saved a lot of lives. If you look at every death is a horror. But if you look at a real catastrophe like Katrina, and you look at what happened here with really a storm that was just totally overpowering. Nobody's ever seen anything like this. What is your death count as of this moment? 17?
16 certified.
16 people certified. 16 people versus in the thousands.
U.S. President Donald Trump speaking in Puerto Rico today. Frances Robles is a New York Times reporter who has been covering the aftermath of Hurricane Maria for The Times. We reached her today in San Juan.
Frances, what's your sense of how people are responding to President Trump's visit to Puerto Rico today?
I think it's kind of an eye roll, to be honest. I interviewed a few people in the last few days, and it was really interesting. They all said the same thing. Well, I've heard what President Trump has to say about Hispanics. I haven't heard anything good. So what can I expect from him here?
And the statements that he made today when he was visiting sounded, well, for the most part, saying that he thinks that he and his team have done an amazing job. He said, we've gone all out for Puerto Rico, but he said, I hate to tell you, Puerto Rico, but you're throwing our budget out of whack. We spent a lot of money in Puerto Rico. Do people feel that's true, that that's actually what they see on the ground?
They definitely don't feel that that's what they see on the ground. It has taken several days, really only until maybe yesterday and the day before that, for them to start seeing the actual aid. The food is starting to trickle in only now. And so people are kind of scratching their heads as to what's taken so long.
And what has taken so long?
There's a lot of logistical nightmare that had to be dealt with in terms of clearing roads. And I also think there were other things that were kind of mission priority, such as getting electricity to the hospitals. There was a lot of problems at the port. There were a lot of problems at the airport. So I think that there was just too many things for the federal government to deal with at once.
And do you think that they were trying hard? They were doing what President Trump claims they were doing, which is an all-out effort?
I'm only going to tell what I see on the ground.
And that is that you've seen an all-out effort?
I've been up and down the island. I went to the west. I went to the southeast. I have seen very little in terms of distributions of food. I saw one yesterday in Canóvanas in the east. What you mostly saw were Puerto Ricans helping other Puerto Ricans. They were clearing the roads. They were tying up power lines and getting them out so that people didn't get hurt.
So you didn't see what President Trump has suggested, that they want everything done for them?
Oh, not at all. And the one thing that's been really interesting is that even when you ask people like, oh, aren't you upset? Isn't this terrible? They're really positive. I interviewed this lady last night. She's standing in a house that has no roof and only 3 walls. She said, some people really lost everything. So, you lost everything. This house is soaked. All the contents are ruined, and you have no roof and no walls. And she said, yeah, but I still have that wall.
Wow. And what else do they have? I mean, you've been out of San Juan. You've seen what's going on in the parts that few people are getting to or not getting very many stories out of. What are you seeing out there?
I think the biggest problem that you hear from people over and over again right now is the food stamp issue. Many people in Puerto Rico live off of that, about 40% of the island. And so with the widespread telecommunications and electricity problems, the supermarkets are not processing what's referred to as food stamps. And also many banks are closed and ATMs are closed. So they have neither the cash nor the food stamp capabilities.
And what about water?
I think about 40% of Puerto Ricans right now have not drinking water, but running water, I should say. The bottled water is starting to trickle out, but it's very few.
And what about the sort of other infrastructure besides running water? What about electricity, cell phone towers, roadways, any of that getting repaired?
95% of Puerto Rico has no electricity right now. I mean, if you look at it, you just look around and you say, there's no way that anybody can pull this off in any fast amount of time. It's just staggering. You cannot find a street where there are not power lines on the ground or facing the wrong direction. I just don't even know how they're going to do this.
And you say people, for the most part, are taking this somewhat in stride. They're trying to figure out how to solve problems for themselves because they're not getting it from elsewhere. Is that your experience?
Sure, absolutely. They are really having a positive spirit. They're trying to get ahead as best as they can. I mean, I met one man in the South who, I asked him, what's the hardest thing? And he said, the hardest thing is when your kids tell you that they're hungry and you don't have anything to give them. And I said, well, what did you do? He said, well, I killed chickens. And I'm thinking, so what, right? Isn't that what a chicken is for? And he said, no, these are cockfighting chickens. So he killed a $200 chicken because his kids didn't have anything to eat and he had no money to buy anything.
So they're just at the very end then?
Yeah, I would say that. Depending on where you are and how much food you stocked up on. Luckily, some of the supermarkets are open. So I went to Comerío, which is a rural town about an hour from here in San Juan, and the supermarket was open. I mean, I'm not going to say that there was huge amounts of supplies, but you weren't going to starve.
One of the other things that President Trump said today in Puerto Rico, he said that he compared to Puerto Rico to what he called a real catastrophe, which would be Katrina, where many people died, hundreds of people died. And he said that only 16 had died. That's the official death count in Puerto Rico, and that they should be very proud of that death count, which shows that it wasn't as serious as other places have been. What can you tell us about the actual death count, about how many people have actually perished from this hurricane?
There's no question that everyone is expecting the death count to rise, especially if you start looking at indirect causes. So in the last 2 weeks, they're starting to get more and more hospitals are starting to open up. But initially, they had maybe 20 or 30 hospitals open, and they were running on generator power. And even the ones that are open, they don't necessarily have the medicine that they need. The pharmacies can't process people's insurance. So even if they have a person's medicine, they say, okay, but you have to pay cash. And the people don't have it because maybe their ATM by their house is broken, or they don't have the gasoline to get to the bank. So it's this real terrible, vicious circle causing so many problems.
We will leave it there, Frances. We'll be following your coverage, and I appreciate speaking with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Frances Robles is a New York Times reporter. She has been covering the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. We posted more on that story on the As It Happens website. That is cbc.ca/AIH. And tomorrow morning on The Current, they're going to take a look at what the disaster means for efforts to make Puerto Rico an American state or an independent country. After the massacre in Las Vegas on Sunday that killed at least 59 people, thousands who witnessed it firsthand were left grieving and terrified and in shock. And early yesterday, a call went out for volunteer crisis professionals. The mental health community responded within hours and responded in droves. Michelle Paul is a clinical psychologist at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. She spent hours speaking with concert-goers and witnesses after they were moved to a stadium on the university campus. We reached Ms. Paul in Las Vegas.
Ms. Paul, I know you got a text in the middle of the night on Sunday about the shooting, and soon after you were there providing counseling. What did you see when you arrived at the University of Nevada campus?
Well, the first thing I saw was security in a pretty orderly fashion, bringing folks in. Folks were coming off of buses and lined up, and there are escalators that lead up to the stadium. So folks were getting screened through security, including myself, and then kind of going up to the entrance and being just kind of welcomed in, and folks were able to sit wherever they felt comfortable.
What kind of state were they in?
So it was oddly calm. Some people were in pretty good spirits. They had been part of the general evacuation off of the Strip. And then there were other folks who were in a little tougher shape. They had been at the venue. They had run away. They had scrambled away, climbed fences, had felt and heard the bullets whizzing past their head, had seen people get shot and fall next to them. And I would say the entire group just felt, we were all sort of feeling like this is really surreal. What are we doing here on a Sunday night? This was not where we were supposed to be.
You met several people from British Columbia. Can you share their stories with us?
Sure. So I met a group of women who had been at the concert, and there's a group of friends on a holiday who they were clearly close to some folks who had been more seriously injured than them. They had run away, scrambled to get away. Folks said that there was chain link fence surrounding the venue, so people had to climb over or break through that fencing to get out, and they were, had various scrapes and bruises and bumps and had lost shoes. So they were separated from other friends, so they were trying to figure out with very limited battery, how are we going to get back?
We spoke with a woman last night who had she'd stayed with a Canadian man who had died, and stayed with him for hours, talking to his family, making sure that he wasn't abandoned, and she didn't know who he was. And I know you've probably heard a lot of stories about or seen strangers supporting each other in this situation.
Yeah, that was another family I met from British Columbia. Had met a couple from Los Angeles. They met in the middle of a drugstore. the couple had been at the venue. The family had just been on the Strip nearby, but everyone had to be evacuated and taken to a safe location. And that family had a young teenage girl with them. And they were sticking together as a group, right, with the couple from L.A. and this family just kind of sharing snacks and sitting together in a shared experience. And it was a shame for this little one to, her grandma, said I wanted to give her, we're from a small town, surrounded by nature, and it was first time on a plane, first time to a big urban place, and we wanted it to be an adventure and fun. And to have this happen, it was, upsetting, to say the least, obviously, for them to, what they had hoped would be an adventure and an experience of a lifetime turned out to be very scary and upsetting.
I can hear the stress in your own voice. I'm sure speaking with all these people, that I'm sure you've picked up a lot of it. But how are you doing? How is the shooting and what happened in Las Vegas affected you?
I think it's an interesting question because I can answer it on a number of different levels. I'm having some trouble even finding the words. I'm incredibly proud of my colleagues and and our city and our town for having rallied in the way we have. Hundreds of mental health professionals have pulled together to coordinate a mental health response in this time. I'm also sad for our community. I'm sad for my students who've been affected. People maybe don't realize, but we're a very small town in many, many ways, and I have not yet met one person who has not been personally affected by this. They knew someone at the venue, or they knew someone who knew someone. No more than just a couple of degrees of freedom. My office manager was missing her friend yesterday. My daughter's friend was injured. And then yes, just holding stories of people's trauma. But I've had my tears here and there, and then there are times when you just got to keep moving and keep busy because there's things to do.
Well, Ms. Paul, I know you have things to do, and I know you're helping a lot of others, so we'll let you go. But I really appreciate you talking to us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Michelle Paul is a clinical psychologist at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. That's where we reached her. Philosopher Jeremy Bentham led an unusual life, as well as being a fascinating radical thinker in the 18th and 19th centuries. He had a walking stick he named Dapple, a teapot he referred to as Dickie, and an elderly cat he named the Reverend Sir John Langbourne. But in death, Mr. Bentham was perhaps even more unusual. For example, he asked that his body be preserved so that he could be wheeled out at parties should his friends miss him. His wishes were followed, for the most part. His body was indeed preserved and displayed at the University College London. Only problem is because of an error, his head was not preserved, at least not the way he intended. Now that is about to change. Subhadra Das is the curator of collections at University College London.
Ms. Das, I'm sure you can appreciate this is a bizarre story.
It rather depends on how you mean bizarre. I suppose I've been working with this for so long now that perhaps my view of it is a little different. But I will concede that, yes, putting the severed head of a 200-year-old dead utilitarian philosopher in an exhibition is bizarre.
Now, Jeremy Bentham's body has been on display all this time, right?
It has indeed, yes.
But the head was removed. So put us through that part of the story first.
Well, there's two aspects to the removal. The first is the physical removal of the head from his body when he died. Bentham had made a special request that his head be preserved in the style of the Maoris, the native New Zealanders. But his friend, Dr. Southwood Smith, who was tasked with creating the auto-icon, wasn't necessarily as practiced with that as he probably would have liked to have been. And so the result was a head that Southwood Smith said was not suitable for display, which is why he had a wax model commissioned, and that's the one that is on display with the auto-icon, which is the skeleton in Bentham's own clothes. The second removal is one when it was taken off display, and that we're not exactly sure when that happened, but we think it was sometime in the 1990s, and that was because the head had been kidnapped by UCL's rival university, King's College in London. And so because of the sort of added security risk to the head, we think that was the reason why it was taken off display at that time.
I'm looking at a photo, which is Jeremy Bentham with looking normal, but this is a wax head that he's got. But this is his real body in this photo, isn't it?
That's correct, yes. So in a box in the south cloisters of the UCL building is the auto-icon of the philosopher Jeremy Bentham. That is his own skeleton dressed in his own clothes, but with a model head.
And this grotesque head is at his feet, and that's the one that you're going to put back.
That's correct. So we're not putting it on display in that box as you see it there. It's on display in a special exhibition, which is called What Does It Mean to Be Human? Curating Heads at UCL.
Now, since the head was recovered after it was kidnapped by the students, where has it been all these decades?
Well, I could tell you, but then I would have to kill you. So it's rest assured that it is in a secure and museum standard, conservation grade secure place.
And how have you been preserving it? How does it, even in its grotesque state, how does it stay in that state?
Well, I mean, it is grotesque to look at. Again, I've been relatively conditioned, so I would suggest to you, actually, there is a replica model that was on display at Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum in London, and to my mind, that is a much more grotesque version than the real head itself. But it is actually relatively well preserved in terms of the skin. It was dehydrated by being suspended over sulfuric acid, so it's relatively stable. His hair gives us a little concern because his hair does tend to fall out. So our way of taking care of him is to treat him very carefully.
That's his real hair that's on this head.
That is his real hair, exactly. Some of his hair was also taken to be put onto the wax head of the auto-icon as well.
Now, you're not just going to put this on display. This is part of a study. This is a larger kind of research that is being done because of the DNA. Can you tell us what you're going to attempt to do?
So Bentham was one of the first people to think about how a dead body could be more useful to society in general if it was given to medical specialists to study and cut up rather than simply being buried.
Now, Jeremy Bentham insisted that his body be preserved in this way so that he said that after his death he could be taken to parties and people wouldn't miss him because he'd still be around. How do you think he would feel about how you're going to display him and how he's going to be examined?
There's two ways to answer that. One is that if he thought that his soul, his mind in any way survived him after death, then I think he would have approved of this course of action and would have, hopefully, is enjoying a slightly different view now being in the octagon rather than just having the view of the inside of a storage box. But really the way to think about this and what Bentham's revolution was is that when you're dead, you're dead. There's really nothing left. And so to kind of suppose what his wishes are in his absence is possibly a bit of a spurious exercise. He enjoyed a joke. He did take it. There was a humorous aspect to the way that he approached this, but also a very serious one. So I would like to think that he approves not only of being the head being put on display, but also in terms of what we're trying to achieve with this exhibition and getting people to think about science and death and what we can learn from dead bodies.
And why is it that one of the things the scientists will look at and in his DNA is to see if he was autistic or had Asperger's? Why are they thinking that may be a possibility and looking for that?
So autism is only one of the things that a sequencing Bentham's genome could potentially tell us, but it's a good example of how some people have made suppositions about Bentham based on historical material. This is taking a scientific approach to be able to prove that one way or the other.
And what is it about Bentham that makes people suspect that he may have been on the spectrum?
I think it's to do with the fact that he was quite, antisocial is not the best way to put it, but he didn't like to mix with large numbers of people. Now, I'm fairly similar, and I don't necessarily think that I'm autistic. So I think there are aspects to his behavior when he was a young man and also later on that have given people an indication that might be it.
And then also he is pivotal, I understand, in the establishment of Britain's first police force. And then he was also an advocate for the rights of women, for homosexuality to be legalized. So he was a progressive.
Hugely progressive. In fact, probably, as we understand it, and in the traditional sense, one of the earliest liberals. They called him the old radical, because his liberal views went up against the authorities at the time. But yes, the more I learn about him, the more sympathetic I am with his view of the world and how he saw it, looking at the world so that it's as good or as fair a place for as many people as possible.
Just fascinating. Ms. Das, I appreciate speaking with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Subhadra Das is the curator of collections at University College London, and that is where we reached her. When you are a tourist in Paris, everything seems so exotic. The little bakeries, the coffee shops, the bars, ordinary Parisians in their ordinary Parisian clothes doing their ordinary daily Parisian business. Even the pigeons seem slightly different. Of course, to a visitor's eye, part of that is just the glamorous context, although part of it is also the fact that the pigeons' remaining feathers do glimmer becomingly in the European sunlight as they plummet to the earth with their heads torn off. Now, that's not happening yet, but it is imminent. As of October 7th, as humans enjoy squab stuffed with foie gras on the ground, other visitors to the city will be enjoying squab stuffed with squab organs in the air. Paris, you see, doesn't just have pigeons, it has a pigeon problem. And Rémi Ferraud, mayor of the city's 10th arrondissement, is fed up with them. To him, they are not remotely exotic. They are, quote, a real health risk for local residents, unquote. Plus which, they locally paint the town white, coating the city's historic buildings with their guano. And so Mayor Ferraud's plan is simple. Having exhausted all other pigeon discouragement tactics, he has hired assassins. 2 hawks and 3 falcons to aerially patrol the 10th arrondissement. According to the people in charge of the falcons, quote, this technique, which is without danger for man, achieves optimal and lasting results, unquote. Well, okay. If you say so, and sure, it may work well, but the birds of prey aren't just going to persuade the pigeons to leave town. They're going to, how to put this delicately, they are going to rend the pigeons' flesh with their razor-sharp beaks and litter the streets with their horribly mutilated, half-eaten bodies. That might reduce the bird population, but it may cause residents and tourists some serious problems in the city's downtown gore. He was so close to getting a fresh start. But a 31-year-old gay Syrian refugee has died in Lebanon while awaiting transport to Canada. Ahmed, whose last name is being protected by his sponsors, had his application approved by the Canadian government in August. But over the weekend, he needed urgent medical care for a heart condition. Hospitals in Beirut refused to treat him, and he died on Sunday morning. Dani Ramadan is a gay Syrian refugee. He now lives in Vancouver, and he helped connect Ahmed to his Canadian sponsors. We reached Mr. Ramadan in Vancouver.
Dani, you knew that Ahmed was so close to starting a new life in Canada. You and others did all you could. How did you react when you learned that he had died this weekend?
It was quite shocking, to be honest. I woke up and I was checking Facebook, and I found a post from a friend of his that he passed away, and I just looked at my phone and I was like, is this a joke? Is this like some sort of a sick joke that somebody is pulling? Like I didn't believe it for a second, and then I just picked up the phone and I called a friend of his that I know, and I got this crying woman on the other side telling me that he passed away, and And I think after I heard the details, I just sat down there, looked at my phone, and I just couldn't believe it.
What are the details? What did happen to Ahmed he was in Beirut, right?
He was in Beirut. He has been going through some health issues for a while now. He was vomiting a lot of blood and just had a fever, and he was at his rented apartment on his own. His friend, the one that I spoke to, told me that she called him and asked him to come over to her house and stay over at her house for the night. By 2 o'clock in the morning, he continued to cough blood and hallucinate. He was quite out of it, so they started to try to get him into hospitals, but not many hospitals would accept a Syrian refugee in Lebanon, especially with how expensive hospitals are and the lack of insurance. So until he ended up in one of the hospitals, they were accepted, and then they were told that he will be put in extensive care. The doctors informed them that actually he passed away in his hospital bed. Apparently their friends started to cry and scream, and that's all I know.
And you wrote on your Facebook posting, she had told you at least he passed away dreaming of coming to Canada. What was delaying his arrival in Canada? This sponsorship group in Vancouver had been put together a year and a half ago. So what was holding it up, his arrival here?
It's quite disheartening to think that he was so close to come here yet so far. It has been taking over a year and a half of filling paperwork and government channels that we had to go through, and then sending the application to some sort of a location here in Winnipeg. They will give us an application number, and then it will go to the embassy, and the embassy is understaffed. It took months and months for the application to be processed. We have written in the application that he has a heart condition, that he is suffering, and still we face a lot of challenges for that application to be submitted and for him to hear back from the embassy in Beirut.
And here you mentioned elsewhere that he is a gay man in the Middle East with a heart condition. He's coming from a war zone. He is traumatized by so many things. He is threatened by all kinds of issues, not least of all being gay, being a refugee. And his only hope was coming to Canada. And he's supposed to be, we're told that these are high priority cases. If this is high priority, what's happening with everybody else?
Well, that's the other thing. Like, since the story of Syrian refugees is not in the public eye anymore, it has becoming longer and longer for applications to be processed. I have an application for 2 women who are living outside of Syria. They're living in one of the Gulf countries, and they have been waiting for an application number for a year now. It used to take a month. They're lesbians, they are partners, they can't find rent easily. As women in a very conservative society, they are treated quite badly by their employers, and they are forced to stay in the country and wait because there is no other way.
You came to Canada as a gay Syrian refugee when Stephen Harper was still Prime Minister. The Harper government was highly criticized for delays and not processing applications. How much do you think things have really improved under the Liberals?
Things initially improved quite a lot. We got a lot of applications processed in a very short period of time, but I think now the topic is not a priority anymore. We don't see applications being processed as soon as they were, specifically talking about very endangered minorities of people, the sexual and gender identity folks who are facing multiple layers of challenges, and we still don't see a lot of push for that regard. It's quite disheartening, really. We are a country that celebrate our diversity, and we are not pushing to support the folks who are on the other side, who are waiting to come here and join us, who are the most successful cases of integration to the Canadian community.
In your Facebook post about Ahmed, you wrote that you told him it will be a long and hard road, but everything will be fine. And then you had to write, I made him a promise that I won't be able to keep. What do you want people to know, what people in Canada to know about what people like Ahmed are going through?
I was just telling him that, you know what, this will happen. This will be possible. You are young, you are capable. There are 8 people here who want to fundraise money for you, who want to help you with your applications. And when you arrive, they want to show you Canada and show you the beauty of Vancouver and help you integrate into the Canadian community. And I'm heartbroken, to be honest. I'm just heartbroken. It's hard to see that someone so close and someone who could have been among us right now is not with us anymore. And I feel like there's so much that it could have been done that would prevent this. If the application was processed faster, if the situation over there wasn't as difficult, if hospitals accepted him. This is an unnecessary death of somebody who was soft-spoken and beautiful on the heart and full of hope and really just wanted to be here and feel appreciated and feel valued for his identity.
And we'll remind people he was 31 years old.
Yes.
Danny, I'm so sorry to hear this story, and I appreciate all that you're doing to try and help people over there. And thanks for speaking with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol.
Danny Ramadan is a gay Syrian refugee and activist living in Vancouver. That is where we reached him. Back in 1974, Tom Petty was a guy with a band, struggling to make a living in Gainesville, Florida, sometimes digging graves to get by. But he knew that if he could just get the record company to hear his music, he would have a chance. So he made a tape and he drove across the U.S. to L.A. and he proved his theory, and he proved it over and over again for decades. He had hit after hit with his band, the Heartbreakers, with the supergroup he co-founded, the Traveling Wilburys, and as a solo artist. The guy from Gainesville became one of the best-selling musicians of all time. Tom Petty died last night. He was 66 years old. In 2014, he spoke to CBC Radio about finally getting someone to let him into a studio and make some sound.
We were put in that situation early on at Shelter Records by Denny Cordell, who was, God bless him, he's passed on now, but he just put us in the studio. Like Shelter owned its studios, so he just put us in there and leave us, and then check in on us. But he'd say, you need to learn that making a record and performing live are not necessarily related that much. The record is a performance, but there's no one there. You're creating just like you would an oil painting. You're adding color, you do your sketch, and there's a lot that goes on. So bit by bit, you learn how to make these noises that are, attractive or interesting, and that's tremendous fun.
It's Tom Petty speaking with the CBC back in the summer of 2014. Again, Tom Petty died last night at the age of 66. Paul Zollo is a musician and a music writer. He got to know Tom Petty pretty well during the process of writing his 2004 book, Conversations with Tom Petty. We reached Paul Zollo in Los Angeles.
Paul, first of all, I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
When was the last time you saw Tom Petty?
I saw him a week to the night he died, a week prior to the night he died, which was September 25th. It was the final show in his tour, the 40th anniversary tour with his band, the Heartbreakers, and he played the Hollywood Bowl. And it was the last night, and I've seen him many times and known him for years. I don't think I've ever seen him more happy. He was so happy that night, and they let me take photos right in front, and he smiled so openly and joyously at me several times that it was really like a party that night, and that was the last time I saw him.
What a great memory.
Yeah.
And you got to know Tom Petty while you were writing your book, and this is back in, I guess, in 2004. You were doing the interview, Conversations with Tom Petty.
That's right. I mean, in fact, I'd known Tom since 1994, but when we started the book, that meant we could meet every Saturday for more than a year of Saturdays, and we worked at his home in Malibu on the book. So I already knew him, but I got to know him much better at that point.
What did you talk about in those interviews?
Well, the idea of the book was to be a series of conversations about music and songwriting and being a musician in the world and an artist, not about his life. So that was the original idea. But as we started doing it, it became really clear that his entire life led to his songs, and all his songs were inspired by different chapters in his life. So what started as a series of conversations about creativity and writing songs turned into really the story of his entire life. And he told me everything. He told me about notorious stories about his grandfather, Pulpwood Petty, about whom I'd heard a notorious rumor that he had killed a man in Georgia, and that's why the Pettys had to move to Florida. I never knew if that was true, and Tom confirmed that indeed that was the story that he knew. And so he told me stuff like that had never been confirmed, but he also went into great and very poignant detail about the challenges and the joys of being Tom Petty, being an artist, being a songwriter, being an artist in an industry. As great as he was and as triumphant as he was, being in this industry, the music business, is very challenging, and people might not realize the various challenges he went through and how he faced them and triumphed over them.
What he's best known for are the collaborations, the group work, the Heartbreakers principally. And what is it that he liked about that? What inspiration did he draw for the idea that he wanted to have band members and to play in those collaborations?
He loved Elvis. He got to meet Elvis when he was a kid, when Elvis was doing a movie in Florida. But what really changed his life was seeing the Beatles when they performed on the Ed Sullivan Show when he was a kid, a teenager. And at that point, realizing, gee, that looks like a pretty great job. That's what I want to do. He never had a vision of being a solo artist or being like Elvis. He wanted to be one of the Beatles. And he also loved the Byrds very much and other bands. So he had a great love of bands and the great fortune of meeting truly phenomenal musicians there in his hometown of Gainesville. But the thing is, when they came to L.A. to get a record deal, immediately, as the industry will do, they tried to persuade Tom from this band idea and offered him a solo deal and gave him a lot of money. And many artists at that point are very happy to step over their friends and accept the deal. Tom didn't do that. He said, no, I'm a band. And he insisted on that. And that distinguished him. Not everyone would do that.
Now, besides the Heartbreakers, most fascinating collaboration, if people can imagine this, of course, the Traveling Wilburys. Bob Dylan, George Harrison, Jeff Lynne, and Roy Orbison, and Tom Petty. What did he think of that? Did he? I mean, those are all of them very phenomenal musicians and artists. Did he feel competitive with them? How did he collaborate with them?
Well, that was a time of pure joy in his life. When he would speak to me, there were some very dark, sad chapters of his life, and his sadness was palpable. I could always tell. And in the same way, there was really infectious joy when he would talk about happy parts of his life, and nothing more joyful ever in his life that he discussed with me than the Wilburys. Because for him, that was a chance to make music completely for passion and joy and fun. It wasn't about writing a hit. It wasn't about making money. It was his chance to get to play with people that he truly idolized himself. They didn't get too precious about it. They had fun. They'd write a song first thing in the morning, all of them writing together with their acoustic guitars, have a great meal, they had a chef there, and then make the record of that song that day. So it was immediate and fun, and just about the authentic passion of rock and roll.
You mentioned the dark periods, and there certainly were those in Tom Petty's life. What did he tell you about those?
He went through, like a lot of rock and rollers, some problems with drugs, and drugs, especially cocaine, really can mess someone up. And he was overdoing it, and that exploded in a recording session at Capitol Records when he was trying to get a mix, and he just could not get what he wanted, and he was so upset and so crazy on cocaine that he smashed his hand into the wall. And he smashed the wall, and he smashed his hand, as he said, to powder, to the extent that the doctor said, you will never play guitar again. And that was maybe the lowest chapter of his life, but also a time when he could have gone under, but instead he used that as a way of redeeming himself and getting off of cocaine. And perhaps there are other times in his life that he didn't want to talk about. He didn't want to talk about his first wife, Jane, and their divorce. So that's not in the book, and I think that was part of their agreement that would be off the record. But I know that was really hard, and that period between Jane and when he met Dana, And he moved out of his home. They were living in Encino, where I first met him. That period was tough for him, I know. I saw him once during that period, and he seemed lost and really sad.
What do you think will be Tom Petty's legacy, his contribution to American pop music?
I think Tom Petty will be considered one of the great and maybe last true rock and roll heroes from America, true rock and roll American heroes, that he was authentic, that since the very beginning he plugged into the juice of that started rock and roll, the juice that got Elvis going, and then the Beatles and the Stones and the Byrds. That's where he came from, with an authentic love and passion for that, and he never let go of that. So I think his legacy will be that he was the real deal, that nothing he did was ever contrived. It was all authentic rock and roll with true love for the art of songwriting and the craft, and for the energy of rock and roll.
Paul, I want to thank you for sharing your memories of Tom Petty with us. I really appreciate that.
Thank you very much. It's nice to talk about my friend.
Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Paul Zollo is the author of the book Conversations with Tom Petty. We reached Mr. Zollo in Los Angeles. They waved a flag, and it cost a number of Egyptians their freedom. Last month in Cairo, at a concert by the band Moshra Lelo, a group of audience members brought out a rainbow flag. The response from government authorities was swift and brutal. 6 people were arrested, and now dozens more have been rounded up and charged. The band itself is from Lebanon. Its lead singer, Hamid Sino, is gay. We reached Mr. Sino in New York.
Mr. Sino, what are you hearing about the people who were arrested after raising the rainbow flag at your concert? What is happening with them now?
To be honest, it's been a little bit difficult to try and really figure out what's going on. Not just with the people who did raise the rainbow flag, but with the people who've been arrested after the concert in general. Because the media coming out of Egypt is not very reliable at the moment. Several human rights organizations have been blocked on the ground. This campaign is yet another instance where certain events going on in Egypt are being used to further the crackdown on human rights organizations.
Can you tell us what have they been charged with? Do you know?
So in general, in Egypt, because homosexuality isn't explicitly criminalized, they end up being charged with either debauchery or incitement of debauchery or support of debauchery, which are pretty ridiculous charges of sort of public immorality, which becomes rather comical when you consider that all these people have done is basically raise a piece of fabric in the air out of support. Normally, the maximum sentence for that is 3 years with a fine, but there has apparently been a person who's already been sentenced to 6 years, which is double the regular sentencing time.
I understand that they have been subjected to anal examinations, which has been proven to be something that can yield no evidence of anything, and also is often called torture. Do you know why the authorities are doing that to them?
Well, it's ridiculous pseudoscience. It's supposed to, it really, if you think about it, sheds light on the kind of mindset that the state and certain parts of Egyptian society and other Middle Eastern societies, the mindset in which homosexuality is framed tends to be about looking at men's sexuality in particular. It tends to also be extremely misogynistic in the sense that it is loath to the idea of being of having the male body penetrated, right? Which is obviously not the way in which we identify homosexuality, right? Anal examinations have been sort of proven to be completely irrelevant, medically not sound, to be in no way determinant of whether or not someone actually is a homosexual, let alone whether or not someone is actually engaged in that kind of intercourse. But essentially, it's just a version of the state allowing itself to violate the sanctity of people's bodies, which is it's just a horrible thing.
Can you take us back to the concert itself? And what was it like the moment when you saw the rainbow flag raised in the audience?
I mean, it was heartwarming, to be honest, just to, see that some people felt emboldened enough to actually be supportive or be sort of publicly express themselves and their political opinions regardless of their own identities. It was really heartwarming to see that happening. I know it would have been much more difficult for people from my generation to even entertain the idea of doing something like that. So it was really beautiful to see. It was also really beautiful to see that it didn't, that there wasn't any sort of immediate backlash at the concert, that, 35,000 people saw that flag go up and no one got into fistfights. No one harassed anyone else.
Now, Egyptian authorities have, first of all, we should point out that it's not explicitly against the law to be homosexual in Egypt, but it's highly taboo. And now 22 people have been arrested, starting with...
The numbers haven't been verified. We've heard it's 22 people in the last 7 days, in addition to the 11 people in the first 3 days, and that at this point it's upwards of 35.
Why do you think this crackdown has happened and first starts at your concert and then spreads? So why do you think that's happening right now?
I think cracking down on the LGBTQ plus community historically has proven to be a way for political leaders to make it look like they're safeguarding some version of conservative national morality. Unfortunately, a lot of political gains to be had by torturing a segment of the community. I think people do it for strategic reasons. They probably win a lot of votes.
I know you put out a statement calling for others in the music industry, culture, inside and outside Egypt, anywhere in the world, to express their solidarity with those Egyptians who have been arrested. Is there anything more you can do? Anything that you feel that you plan to try and do in order to help those who have been taken into custody?
To be honest, historically, the only thing that has worked with these situations is to rally as much international solidarity and pressure as possible. Repressive governments do always end up responding to public pressure. The more polemical this becomes, the more people talk about this, the more likely those people are to get out with less harm inflicted on them. The idea of them coming out completely unscathed seems to be completely sort of impossible at this point. I mean, they're already in there, and the security apparatus has a history of all sorts of violence and all sorts of abuse. But we can get them out faster. We can get them out safer if there's more talk about this.
Well, Mr. Sino, we're going to try and keep on top of the story and find out more what we can to what's happened to those people and who they are. I appreciate that you spoke with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hamed Sino is the lead singer of the Lebanese band Mashra Halelo. We reached him in New York City. You've been listening to the As It Happens podcast. Our show can be heard Monday to Friday on CBC Radio 1 and Sirius XM.
You can also listen to the whole show on the web. Just go to cbc.ca/AIH and follow the links to our online archive. Thanks for listening. I'm Carol Off.
And I'm Jeff Douglas.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.